Okay, the studio's moved. The podcast is back. We have a very special guest today. That's about all I got for you guys. Welcome back to the show. Today's guest is cinematographer Oren Soffer. Oren is a quickly rising star among the ranks of directors of photography, whose latest project releases on September 29th, which is in just a few days, called The Creator. You may have seen the trailer or heard of it. It was directed by Gareth Edwards, who directed Star Wars Rogue One, and he was co-DP with Greig Fraser, who's shot Dune and The Batman and all this crazy stuff. We talk a little bit about The Creator towards the end of this episode, but he's going to have a lot of press and a lot of conversation centered around that film. So in typical No Set Path fashion, we're peeling back the curtain a little bit, finding out what makes Oren tick, talking about how he got started, where he came from, and how he got to where he is now. All that good stuff. I don't want to hold this up any longer, so without further ado, here is my interview with Oren Soffer.
Life? How's life?
What I've been saying lately is things are good under the circumstances.
Okay. You want to elaborate on that one a little bit?
Well, we're in the midst of a historic industry-wide labor movement that might define the future of this art form as we know it, or if it is just relegated to the trash heap of tech industry history. So, no stakes or anything. And we're all just kind of caught in the middle.
Yeah, all that considered, you look well.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I can't complain.
Well, all right. Well, let's dig in, man. I mean, we haven't. I had to go back and rewind my brain a little bit because I met you because you used to be a New York City guy, and I was in the city at the time, and I've since moved up to the Hudson Valley, which has its own burgeoning film scene apparently.
But he moved during the pandemic. Everybody moved up to the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I had to rewind my brain, and I think the last time I actually saw you in person was ages ago when I was still trying. I was like, am I a cinematographer? Am I a director? I don't know. And I was just kind of putting stuff out there and seeing what stuck. And you randomly found me, and you're like, I think you're trying to direct things. Let's grab a bite and talk. And we had dinner somewhere in the city. I don't remember where exactly.
That's right.
Somewhere near Union Square, I think.
Yep.
And that was that might have been the last time I actually saw you in person.
Yeah, and I have no sense of memory of when that was because
anything neither
before March 2020 is just one giant blur of nothingness.
Yeah, totally. Like I said, as we were setting this up, and something I know you're going to get a lot of. We're going to dig into kind of where you've come from and where you are now, and just kind of get a little peek behind the curtain of how you got to the position you're in, right? Yeah. And you're going to wrap up this year in a pretty big way, The Creator coming out at the end of September. But what I don't want to do, and I'll say it publicly, is I don't want to have the camera conversation with you because you're going to get a lot of that. You've probably already been getting a lot of that. I definitely texted you a Reddit thread where that conversation was happening, of which you were well aware. I'm really interested in, especially with everybody I talk to, is kind of what makes them and what makes their path unique, hence the name of the show.
Yeah,
right?
I love it.
Yeah. So before we get into what's happening now and what's happening with your career at present, I just have a framework of a few things I want to talk about, but kind of the thing that popped into my head, and I try to change up how I talk to people every time, is, if you had to pick out, without giving us a blow-by-blow history of Oren, if you could pick out 3 pivotal moments, let's just even call it in career world, right? 3 defining moments of this was a huge deal because it set me down this road, and this was a huge deal because it set me down this road. Is it hard for you to pick those out, or do you kind of have those pretty at the ready?
Yeah, I think I got them.
Okay.
I think I got them.
Let's hear it.
I'll go in chronological order.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so first moment, the first time I even really had the idea to pursue a career in filmmaking, that this was something you could do for a job, was there was a 1-2 punch. So the first punch came in 1997. I was 9 years old, And along with the re-release of the special editions, the Star Wars special editions, they put out a CD-ROM that was an interactive, like behind the scenes of the making of the original trilogy. And I can picture it in my head. There was like a scene on Tatooine and you could click on different things, and each thing that you clicked on showed you like a little 10-minute behind the scenes like vignette. And it's all the shots that, and if anyone's seen any BTS stuff from the original Star Wars, you've seen all this footage. It's like the blue screen shots of the X-Wings, the camera that's flying over the Death Star, like all the ILM stuff that they shot in the parking lot, and then all the set footage in Tunisia with the boom op with the pink shorts and all that. So that was like my first exposure as a 9-year-old who loved films and loved movies and was obsessed with Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Back to the Future and all of that. That was the first connection that I had to like, oh, you can actually, like, people make these and I want to make these. I want to do that. And then the second punch came in between 2001 and 2003 with the release of the Lord of the Rings DVD box sets, the special features. So that went way more in depth, 10 hours per disc, so 30 hours total. And that was fully the formative, like, I want to be a filmmaker, and I want to specifically be a cinematographer, because there was like a segment on one of them that talked about the cinematography and the lighting and color grading, and like these went into everything. So I think by that point, like 2003, I started high school, and that was when The Return of the King came out. And that was when I was like, I want to be a filmmaker. I want to do cinematography. And so my friends and I started filming all sorts of videos and music videos. And we had a film class in high school, which I realize is very rare. And the more I talk about it with people, but we were able to start, we had a teacher that taught us like wide shot, medium shot, close up, like all the basics and fundamentals. And so that was formative experience number one.
That was number two.
Well, it was 1 and 1.5.
Copy.
Skip ahead to, I went to film school. I went to NYU Film School. And then my first time I felt like, oh, I'm building like a professional portfolio was 2016. Where I shot 2 projects that I think finally like were at a level that I felt matched what I had in my head, which I think is like a big gap that people have to kind of bridge from when they just start filmmaking and messing around with their friends or going to film school to like, okay, well, how do I actually become a professional? So there were 2 projects, and they're actually both still on my website because I'm still proud of them. And one was a PSA for Special Olympics, and one was a music video. And they were both made for like a couple $1,000s, almost no budget, but we were able to like elevate them and make something that I felt was really polished and really complete as a piece. And I was able to get representation off of the back of those projects and all that. So that was sort of the next milestone. And then, the third one is when I got the call to do The Creator. That was the third, like, oh my God, what is going on? Why am I getting this call? How am I in this position? And like, let's like go on this adventure and hopefully open up this next chapter of life and career. And I'm sort of still in that period, like that started 2 years ago, and now it's gonna come to its conclusion at the end of September. But so that's the third moment.
I wasn't really sure how I wanted to like get into our conversation, right? And that's always kind of the thing. This being a conversation-based show, it's like how do you get into it? And I'm glad I started with this because you've really touched on like a lot of stuff that I was like that you'll see as we go.
Yeah.
I do remember those Lord of the Rings box sets. I still have them upstairs. I'm a little bit older than you, so I was out of school or just graduating college, and living in an apartment with some roommates, and I spent so much time watching those DVD extras. And I was a music guy at the time, so I didn't know anything about filmmaking. So I like went back and watched the music thing over and over. But I do remember watching the digital grading behind the scenes when like digitally color grading things was in its infancy, and they were like digitizing miles of film and then like just kind of hacking their way through it. And now it's something we all do on our laptops every day, so it's totally wild.
Absolutely. And another hilarious full circle moment is Dave Cole, who is our colorist on The Creator. He was on that team. He worked on Fellowship of the Ring.
That is wild.
On the digital grade, the early days of digital DI, like on that film. So
awesome. It's got to be cool to have those like moments, those like mind blown moments where now you're getting to like interact with these people that have kind of been in your field of view for a while.
Oh yeah, for sure.
In some way or another. Yeah. One thing that I've kind of noted on my side of the table as I, have paid attention to your career since we've met and just kind of how you represent yourself on social, what have you. It's like, yes, you have a career as a filmmaker, right? And as a cinematographer, but it also seems like very much a lifestyle to me, in the sense of like, you're participating in the things now for a job that have really engaged you for a good part of your like adolescent and adult life, and the things that you're really interested in, you continue to be really interested in. And that's really cool to just, and I know you have like a thing for building Legos and like, building kits and like kind of living.
They're out of focus behind me.
They're out of focus in the background. But it's, my point is like you're like living a lifestyle, and it's kind of like this whole holistic thing. That's really very cool and really fascinating. It's like you're kind of participating in your own like world building almost, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. I haven't thought about it that way, but I like that.
Yeah, which is cool to me, because I think, part of what keeps any creative going, whether you're a filmmaker or what, it doesn't matter what your career is. I mean, you got to have some kind of imagination. It can't all just be grind all the time. There's got to be something that like fuels your fire. And I think, I think you keep that going for yourself as best I can tell. Right.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you put it that way, because it's that's super interesting. I feel like I've always been a like imagine, a kind of world type person. Like before I even fell in love with filmmaking, when I was still just a Star Wars geek, like as a younger kid, I was already doing all this stuff. Like I had a best friend. This is when I lived in Maryland before my family moved to Israel. But I had a best friend, and we were into all the same stuff. So he was also into dinosaurs and into movies and Jurassic Park and Star Wars and all that. And we would like, our imaginations were just completely unbound. Like it was out of control. Like we would imagine made up scenarios and worlds and stuff, like, just in the living room. Like you build a fort of pillows and cushions from the couch, or like he had a tree house out in the back, and we would always just be imagining like all these made up fictional worlds and world building. And like that was a huge part of my childhood too, like we came up with this whole like sort of Jurassic Park knockoff. It was like a dinosaur park, but it was a lot more advanced, and it was under a dome, like a geodesic dome, and we would pick out the exact species of dinosaurs that they had and everything. And all this we had drawings and drawings and drawings of this stuff. And around that time, like a little bit later, because it only came about once I was like 9 or 10, but I was like super into Pokemon, and I had a whole website of like fictional Pokemon, made up Pokemon that I drew and designed. And I had friends that also had their own designs, and we built this whole like made up world, and there was a map, and there was like a storyline, and that's like always been a huge part of my world, was world building and coming up with fictional worlds. And I had like a whole fantasy realm, which I think everybody has created at some point. Same thing.
Sure.
Elaborate map, all the different factions and beings and creatures and species that coexisted in this, and all the cities and and there was just tons and tons of drawings. Like I would just sit in class and draw this stuff. So yeah, I've never really thought about the connection between that and like how I live my current life as an adult, but I think that connection is there. I think that's a really good observation. And I think that, like anytime you step on set, you're kind of still making make-believe, like you're still playing make-believe as a kid.
100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean, I always tell people that, it's like, especially if I'm on a job, like a commercial job or something, that's just a little bit of a grind. It's like, yeah, I'm getting paid to point a camera at something. It's not, there are much more difficult ways to make a living. But, I think it speaks to the fact that you're not afraid to explore your creative interest. Dude, I wanted to be a paleontologist till I was like 10.
Me too.
And I remember being 5 years old ish, somewhere around there, my grandparents taking me to the Museum of Natural History to see the dinosaur skeletons, and just like losing my mind. Like, it was just like this kind of like life altering moment, realizing that there's, kind of all this stuff outside of your little bubble that you exist in, even as like a little kid. So I think, in my opinion, you following those, like not being afraid to explore those creative tendencies and exploring those worlds and things like that, I think has only helped you in kind of achieving what you've been able to achieve at what would be considered a relatively young age still, which I think is super cool. Milestone number 2, you're talking about being able to recreate the things you're seeing in your mind's eye and still having some of that stuff up on your site. Which music video was it? I'm curious.
It's called Burning in Birmingham.
Was that the one that you shot in the church?
Yeah.
Okay. I remember that, and I was just doing like a little brush up, and you did a no film school write up on that, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Did.
I remember reading that, and I remember, not to throw you under the bus, but I remember people in the comments giving you a lot of crap because you're like, oh yeah, this guy's got a hookup at Panavision and blah, blah, blah. And I always saw it as like, well, he was just being scrappy. Like, everybody should be scrappy and like leveraging his network and leveraging his resources. And, I skimmed through it. I didn't read the whole thing again today, but I skimmed through it. And I'm like, yeah, I remember reading this, and I remember it getting a lot of traffic. And I think that's actually probably how I first heard your name before we actually met in person. But it's so cool that now you're operating up here, and, you still have stuff from, God, what is that, like 7-ish, 8 years ago?
Yeah.
Up on your site that you still stand behind. I mean, I think that's really cool. And before you say anything, I totally remember that moment of picturing something in my head, like, oh, how am I going to light this? How am I going to do this? And it actually working for the first time, and just having it just be this huge aha moment, and just
and it's not just about being able to translate what's in your head into something that actually looks like it, but it's also it's just like a bigger picture thing of being able to create a project where the end result is something that on a holistic scale feels like complete and polished and good. And it's not just, oh, I did this project, I got a couple of cool shots for my reel that look good like on their own, but the project overall isn't really that interesting or whatever. Like, it was the first time I shot 2 projects that I just felt like proud of the end result. And I think that was also kind of a big turning point. I remember that No Film School article very well too, specifically the backlash to it. But look, you're never going to please the people in the comments section. And that website has like, always has had a really passionate comment section. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, they've always had some colorful participants.
Yeah, exactly.
That's for sure.
And I feel like I made a point in that article to point out that, like, I don't want anyone to think that the fact that we were able to get these favors and, we got a Panavision camera package and all this stuff was like just something I had in the back pocket. Like, I came into this industry with 0 connections to it, like that's purely just the relationship that I built over time during film school, like just reaching out to them, to Panavision New York, and building that relationship. And the same with the colorist that we got on that, who was at the Mill at the time, I think, but it was the same thing. And then, people are kind of roasting it in the comments, like, well, how are you supposed to do, well, the context is that the article was clickbaited, titled "How to Make a Music Video for $1,000," right? So that was like that was the clickbait title, and that's what everybody kind of reacted to. Like, well, maybe the budget on paper was $1,000, but the value of the equipment and the colorist and all these elements way exceeds that. And it's like, well, that was sort of the point of it. Was not.
That's the whole point.
It was not to say like, here's
point.
how you take $1,000 and get equipment that is worth $1,000 and make a video. The point was, how do you leverage relationships and limited resources and to create something. But anyway, not to relitigate an article from 8 years ago, but
No. But it brings up, I think it brings up a lot of valid, one thing off the top of my head, and this is like, I'm just, thinking on the fly here. It's like, in my experience, and you know this as well as anybody, it's like the people who are making the most noise in the comments and blah, 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 they're not doing anything, or if they are, I'd be surprised.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a waste of energy. And I think to that point of relationship building and you starting at zero, you also know this, especially having gone to a prestigious film school like NYU. There's a lot of people that come into specifically the film industry with a leg up, whether it's connections or whether it's coming from means or things like that. And I'm not saying I don't slight anybody. Everybody's got their own situation.
Yeah.
But I think it really speaks to, the amount of hustle and the amount of hard work and like the amount of build that you've put into yourself and to your career. And, it's really interesting. It kind of segues into a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. But before I get to those specifically, it's like you're real good at relationship building. I mean, we're in a relationship business, obviously. But I think if I speak about someone like myself, I'm always kind of like a reluctant networker, for lack of a better term. It's like I have a hard time with that. Once I get into conversation with somebody, it's fine. Like I can, shoot the shit and just like build rapport, and that's no problem. But it's like getting over that initial hump that I've always struggled with. And I think people might get something out hearing how you deal with that. Like, I don't want to call it imposter syndrome because it's really not, but just that initial, like, okay, putting yourself out there and just seeing what happened. Because clearly you've done that several times and it's paid off.
I mean, the best way I can describe it is like I flip a switch in my brain.
Okay.
I'm naturally an introvert. I'm also naturally like, I don't particularly like enjoy quote unquote networking or that type of environment. Yeah. Like I would really much rather just be sitting at home playing Zelda. But you also have to acknowledge that we are in a relationship business and everything is built on relationships in the film industry.
Yeah.
And so it's like I flip a switch. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of situation. Like I just turn on my extroverted self, like the extrovert version of me, and it has a battery. So at some point it runs out, but it can run for a few hours. And like I can schmooze, I can shake hands and kiss babies and do whatever you need to kind of like make those kinds of connections and make those kinds of impressions and have those kinds of conversations with people who maybe are naturally extroverted and seek out that kind of connection and relationship. And like, I can meet you on that level and then I got to go home and recharge. So it's like an extroverted introvert type thing. And it literally is, it's like a switch in my brain.
I've not heard the battery analogy before.
Yeah.
I definitely feel a kinship with you in that. Like I'm exactly the same way. I've had to get that way where if I've wanted to make anything happen for myself, that you have to kind of get over it and just figure out a way to like flip that switch. But I absolutely have like a finite runtime with it. And then I need to come back to my hidey hole and, just kind of, recover, for lack of a better term.
Exactly.
But it's like, how do you squash that fear or that apprehension down just long enough to get out there and do some work?
Yeah, it's not even a fear. It's not a fear or an apprehension. It's just like an alter ego, in a weird, like that's the way that that's how I cope with it. And it's more like just the lack of desire and interest. Cause it's like, I would really much rather either be watching something or creating something and like being focused in that mindset. Cause that's the mindset that I can lose myself in for hours. Like that's the mindset that I can not even notice how much time is passing when I'm focused on creative and being in that creative tunnel in that zone. So that's like the goal is to just always be in that state. But we can't always be in that state. Sometimes we have to flip on the other.
Totally. But I definitely relate. And I think a lot of people relate.
Yeah. It's a common thing.
Sure.
It's just an introverted extrovert an extroverted introvert.
An extroverted introvert.
Yeah. It's like a whole thing. If you Google it, you'll find a lot of people who relate to that kind of experience.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, I'm there. It's like, I'm so curious how people learn, because like everybody learns differently. And, specifically in the film world and as a cinematographer, I find that, the learning never stops. And I don't think it should.
Yeah.
I think any good creative enjoys the learning, enjoys the like building of some sort of like toolkit constantly. But everybody learns in different ways. And so, do you have a strategy, or it sounds very formal, I don't mean it to be, but like a strategy or a formula, or just like something that kind of is repeatable for you in terms of learning, whether it's the ropes of the industry or honing your craft, or however you want to categorize it. I'm just kind of curious if you have some kind of like some kind of process or mindset or whatever that really works for you.
Yeah, I mean, I have always been a visual learner, which I think just ties into like it's just a whole right brain, left brain thing. And I think I've just always been a right brain person. Right brain is the creative one, right?
I believe so. Let's go with it.
Your left
I'm pretty
hand.
sure.
Yeah. Where, like, for example, I'm terrible at algebra, and I've always been really bad at algebra. But I'm great.
I'm not good at math either.
I'm great at geometry.
Okay.
Because it's visual.
Sure.
It's like I understand angles and relations between lines and shapes and size. Like if it's visualized, I get it. And if it's text, it loses me. And so that also applies to like learning filmmaking. Is for me, it's always been hands-on. It's always been like trying something out and seeing what it does. I have to see it. It's very hard for me to like read theory. Even when I was younger, like reading American Cinematographer, like it can sometimes be hard because you're reading descriptions about how people use the light. And sometimes when you read that, my eyes just glaze over. I'm like, I have a really hard time like picturing it.
Yeah,
unless there's
totally get
an image
that.
that shows what it's describing. If there's an image that shows what it's describing, I get it. So for better or worse, like that's always been my kind of learning limitation. And so I've always just had to learn from trying stuff on set, like trying stuff, trial and error, trying stuff during test shoots, trying stuff during like lens tests. And that's why I try to keep on top of that as an activity, like going to rental houses and not just looking at lenses, but actually doing like little lighting setups and experimenting with things. Like, I think that's the main way that I learned that, or just, on set. But that's pretty much my approach, but it's an approach that stems from a limitation of my brain.
Sure. I mean, I guess it just works out that you're in a visual career.
Yeah.
That makes
total coincidence that I went into a career in visual arts, like had nothing to do with that at all.
Right. Yeah. To put yourself in a place where you can really focus and you can hone your craft, focus on your career, focus on your creativity. You have to put yourself in a place where you're motivated or confident or whatever. And, something, and a lot of this, I'm just going to use me as an example because, I'm someone who started my career later than most.
Yeah.
And I'm self-taught and all that stuff. So I feel like by proxy, I'm maybe representing some people who might be listening, right? My biggest, hands down, barrier to I think confidently building next steps for myself without a lot of struggle is I do a comparison all the time. And I've talked to a ton of people. Everybody does it in some way, shape, or form. It's not really, like, I'm not asking you, do you do that? It's, how have you learned or taught yourself to kind of block out what others are doing and just kind of focus on what it is you want to focus on? Because as people are going to find out, as your career continues to grow, and now you have things like The Creator coming out and you're working with really like top tier directors and other cinematographers, it's you've been able to get to this place, and you're going to continue to get to this place where I'm sure you feel quite confident about yourself. And that's not speaking to whether you're humble or not. Like, obviously you and I can have a conversation without issue. It's more like, you know, my barrier, and I think other people's barriers to just taking next steps more quickly, is kind of getting to the point of, well, what, you know, this person's doing this person's doing that. How am I ever going to get to that place? And as someone who's built from zero and now is getting to that place, if you have any advice for that kind of mindset shift, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, this is something I've grappled with like my whole career.
Sure.
And I think everybody does. I think people would be lying to themselves if they said they don't, but like, it never goes away, to be honest. Like it truly doesn't. I still compare myself to other DPs all the time. It's inevitable. One solution, there is a solution that is impractical for various reasons, but you know, you can just delete social media. Like, you can just completely erase your online presence and existence and your exposure to other DPs and really just focus on yourself. And you know what? There's some DPs out there that do that and have very successful careers and probably do not deal with this issue at all. They have never even thought about it. The downside of that, obviously, is one, social media and online presence in the year 2023 is just like an inevitable part of having a career and having to sell yourself. I think it's just a reality.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it, I think, can be detrimental to remove yourself from the community. So like, being able to be a part of a larger community and a support system of other cinematographers and other people who are going through what you've gone through, or even just to be a sounding board for like when you need help or advice, or you know, just have like a technical question that you're stuck on, I think has so much value, to the point where it maybe outweighs the negative side of the coin, which is that inevitably you also end up comparing yourself to other people in that community. But being a part of that community and having access to that community has such an advantage that, like, I don't know, it's probably a worthy trade-off if you're able to keep the comparison part like under control. And I think another big thing for me was I read The Artist's Way a few years back on the recommendation, on multiple recommendations. And there's a line in that book that just stayed with me forever. And it's a very short chapter, but she talks about jealousy, and she says, jealousy is a roadmap and it shows you the places you want to go. And it's just a different way of thinking about, instead of comparing yourself negatively to other people, peers, other people who are pursuing your career, it's comparing yourself aspirationally to other people and saying, like, instead of begrudging or, you know, holding some sort of negative thought or feeling about where somebody is or what they're doing, I'm just going to use that as fuel to inspire me and motivate me to continue pursuing my goals and aspirations. And that requires an active process. It requires mindfulness. Like, that's not just something that happens passively. You have to kind of train yourself to think that. But that like completely changed my whole view on the whole comparison issue. And so it's not about, I think it's naive to say like, well, just focus on yourself and just ignore everybody else, because it's impossible, because you can't ignore everybody else. We live in a society, you know, like we live
it's a noisy world out there now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But it's more about like just changing your relationship to how you are looking at other people and how you're comparing yourself to other people and how you interact with the community.
This episode is brought to you by Born Rival. Born Rival is a multidisciplinary brand that celebrates film culture and the use of visual media as a form of expression. Their products are made in the heart of New York City and are an extension of their storytelling spirit. In addition to apparel, they also produce original films and editorial spotlights that feature image makers and storytellers. As a brand, they're embracing the process of creating instead of focusing on the end frame or final cut. Visit bornrival.com to check out their recent collections and films, and be sure to enter code NOSETPATH at checkout to receive 20% off your first order. And now, back to the show. I absolutely love that. I mean, jealousy as a roadmap, because, you'll hear people say, oh, just look at it a different way or whatever. But like actually kind of giving it some context and saying like, oh, well, you're feeling this way because those are the places you want to go and you're just not there yet.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And I'm a huge proponent of the community aspect. And, even something like this show, this podcast I'm doing, it's like my own little way of like trying to contribute to the creative community and have conversations with people and just put something else out there so that people have a resource and people feel less alone and things like that. It's really just therapy for me. That's what we're getting at here.
100%. It is for me too.
Yeah.
Coming on the podcast is therapy. Because I get to just, talk about my thoughts and feelings about things. And honestly, there's no better way to deal with thoughts and feelings than, just to talk about them. Like sometimes it's that simple. And that's the power of the community too, is to build that support system and that network of people that you can talk to. And I have a few like group chats with different DPs where, we'll talk about stuff like this or just like complain about some movie or I don't know, like whatever it is, or praise something and tell everybody, oh, you really have to check this out. So
this is kind of a good segue into the idea of mentorship, right?
Yeah.
I know for sure it's played a big role in your career. You worked while you were in school on some projects with Reed Morano,
yes,
which is awesome. And you've had some other experience up to and including now you've been mentored and worked with Greig Fraser, especially on The Creator, which is coming out soon.
Yeah.
I really want to hear about the importance of mentorship and like the role it's played for you, and how you think others can benefit from it. And then I'm also curious if you have aspirations of mentoring others, or if that's something that's already going on. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, mentorship is huge, and it's definitely played a really big role for me in my career. And I was just very lucky. The Greig thing was just very, very lucky circumstance of meeting him and sort of making that connection. Like, mentorship is tough because there are certain organizations and structures that try to structure it. But structured mentorship can be hard because real meaningful mentorship is organic. And it's not something you can force, and it's not something you can like artificially create. And so I think it's really good that initiatives like the ASC Vision Mentorship and Made in Her Image, and there's a ton. Yeah. There's a ton of really great organizations that offer mentorship opportunities. And I think all of those are worth like pursuing and worth looking into. But, as anybody who's done the ASC Vision Mentorship will attest, like it can be a mixed bag depending on the relationship that ends up forging between you and your mentor, which is something you can't really control. Like you either kind of hit it off with somebody or you don't. And it's, mentorship is so entwined with like interpersonal relationships in which the same thing happens. Like sometimes you hit it off with people and sometimes you don't. And it's okay. Like it is what it is. But yeah, Reed was definitely sort of my first like very early mentorship. I mean, I was a sophomore when I did my first shoot with her, which actually she just posted on Instagram about like some BTS photo from that set. It was for Kill Your Darlings.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And that was the first time I'd ever been on a professional movie set. Was like she came and guest lectured in our class. She's an NYU alum, and she came in and guest lectured in one of our classes. And me and one other kid stayed behind because we already knew who she was at that time. But this was pre everything. Like this was, I think the most well-known thing she had done at that point was Shut Up and Play the Hits, the LCD sound system.
Oh yeah,
concert
yeah,
doc.
okay. Mm-hmm.
So, and she'd done a few other indies. Oh, she did Frozen River. I guess that was sort of maybe her breakout project, and a few other Sundance indies. So I knew who she was, and we just stayed behind to chat with her. And she was like, "Yeah, I'm shooting like the final day on this feature next week. You should come to set." So we did. And then both of us actually did 2 more films with her. And Reed ran a really great mentorship. I mean, it was basically a program. Like it was, again, it wasn't structured or organized, but she was just very open and had a lot of and had a lot of mentees that she would bring on her shoots to kind of help out camera PA and intern. And I know in hindsight, I probably shouldn't even be saying this because like in terms of the union, you're not really supposed to do that. But we, found a way to be useful, but also just be able to be there to observe and learn. And I mean, it was such an amazing opportunity. And then, yeah, Greig, we met years later and kept in touch. Like I kept in touch and I would kind of pester him and bother him over the years. Like, hey, I shot this, I did this, whatever, like just checking in and keeping that relationship alive. But I've done a few jobs with him over the years, like a few little odd bits and bobs here and there.
Oh, okay.
Before this one was sort of a culmination of a few years of sort of working together here and there, but not on anything at this level, like at this scale, for sure.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that's really great. To rewind to Reed Morano, you flipped that switch. You flipped that alter ego on and stayed behind. And I didn't know that was like your first on-set experience. So that's really cool.
First professional set. I mean, I've been shooting student films, but it's not. Yeah, it's a whole other feeling because Kill Your Darlings was like a union film with trucks and big crew.
Oh yeah, to get exposed to that is crazy.
Very different. Yeah. Very different experience. Yeah.
And I've heard through the grapevine in terms of Greig that he's just a really good guy, like very giving and like supportive of the community and of other cinematographers. So that's really, really great, man.
Yeah. Greig does a lot of mentoring. He has a lot of people that he's sort of quietly kind of working with and supporting and brings onto projects. I mean, all you need to do is look at, the list of like second unit photography and additional photography and stuff on his films to see like that's just the kind of guy he is. And also to answer your question, which I forgot to earlier, I do that as well. So I'm very, very big on mentoring and giving back because of how fortunate I've been with those opportunities and how much I've like learned and benefited from that. So I do a DP shadowing program basically on every shoot that I do, including commercials. I'll try to bring on a shadow, and every once in a while I'll put out a little bat signal of like, hey, if anyone's interested, email me. And I have a mailing list. So I basically, anytime I have a shoot anywhere, I kind of send up the bat signal again and see if anybody's available or interested to hop on. And, you can't always make it work. Like sometimes there's certain productions where it's just like not feasible, but I really try whenever I can to,
well, I think, I think the intention's right. And it, it gives me the good feels that you're such a proponent of that and that you're like paying it forward because you, just like I know, there are facets of this job and this industry that can be a slog. It can be a grind. Not everybody has the right attitude or let's say a compatible attitude. So there's lots of things that can be barriers or get in your way.
Yeah.
So I love that you're, keeping it positive and like keeping it constructive.
Yeah, you gotta. I mean, again, it was like, it just goes back to those shoots with Reed. Like that was my first exposure to professional film sets. Just being able to be there, like just being physically there and observing it is more film school than any film school. And that's not to knock film school. I had a great experience at NYU, but I mean, and I wouldn't have gone on these sets if I didn't go to NYU, right? So, but like that's what it is just being on set and seeing it and observing it and feeling that feeling is so crucial for me. So I try to get as many people on set as possible and I specifically try to prioritize people who haven't been on set, like younger people, recent graduates, high school graduates, college, film school, or just folks who like just moved to LA or New York or wherever it may be. Or if I'm traveling for work, like people in local marketplaces, same thing. Like I'll try whatever I can to bring people on who haven't been exposed to something at that level or whatever it is. Like to me, it was just so crucial that I can't imagine.
That's really cool, man.
Not doing it.
Yeah. That's really, really cool. And something you mentioned just kind of in passing is, sometimes specific to something like the ASC mentorship program, which is great, but sometimes the compatibility isn't there between mentee and mentor. And so, something I'm curious about is the concept of creative compatibility. So if I like say that phrase to you, what, like, what does creative compatibility mean to you in your day to day? I'm leaving it kind of open ended because I'm curious how you approach this. But it's like, if you think of it, to tee it up a little bit, if you think of it as like dating,
which I do.
Go on dates. You go on dates with people, and sometimes you're like, okay, this is cool. We'll explore it a little more. Sometimes you're like, nope, hard pass. Like, thanks for the time. I'm good. And then other times you're just like, I need more of this, as much as I can get. So it's like, if we're thinking of it in that context, like, how do you approach or how do you think of creative compatibility, and what is it like? What role does it play?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I use the dating analogy all the time. Like it does feel like that. I mean, it's everything really. Like it plays the biggest possible role because, this is a hard job. Like this is a hard line of work. It's demanding. It's volatile. It's long hours. It's draining. It's physically difficult. And it's one of those things that like, it's not really worth doing unless you're having a good time and unless you're working with good people that align with your sensibilities and your personality. Like if you're on set and having a miserable time, it doesn't matter how much you love filmmaking as a hypothetical, you're probably not enjoying it in that moment. And so what's the point of doing something you don't enjoy? I mean, you got to work. Like people have to work. People have to pay bills. People have to raise a family. So sometimes I get it. Like, it is what it is. But for the most part, like I really try to emphasize that creative compatibility. I think that's huge. And I think it just manifests in two ways. Like one is just the interpersonal level, and it's just working with people that are chill, that like align with your kind of personality type. And that's not to say that they have to have the same personality, but just people that you can get along with. And there's some people that you can get along with that have very different personas and very different, extrovert, introvert, like different interests, people who are into skiing. I don't ski. I've never skied before. I will not have any common interests with somebody who's a big skier, but like I could be friends with someone who skis if our personalities align and if they're just like a person who's interesting to talk to and hang out with. And then, I mean, the other one is taste alignment, honestly, which is a big one, like having the taste of the people that you're working with align with yours, like especially when it comes to directors or co-DPs, for example, like, that taste alignment is really important. But I think that that's what led to a successful collaboration. In the case of the creator, for example, was like our tastes aligned and our personalities aligned. And I think that that's how that connection was made in the first place and continued all the way through that shoot and grew during that shoot. So I think it's sort of a two-pronged thing, but it is very important to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've found like something you mentioned, and I'll kind of elaborate on. Like really, as much as you're able to find the work that you're passionate about doing, and really work on the things that you want to be working on as much as possible, because it just kind of fuels your fire a little more. And I've found this year's been really, really weird for everybody across the industry. Mm-hmm. And as someone who like operates completely outside of the union spectrum at this point, even for me, it's just been weird. And I've found myself on some shoots, not all shoots, but some shoots this year, the few that I've had, where it's, I've had moments of like, I don't know if this is the right kind of fit for me anymore. Yeah. Not that it's bad, but just being, I guess my point in bringing this up is just having, the self-awareness and being in tune with yourself enough to know that like maybe something that used to work doesn't necessarily work now, is also really important. So look, I don't want to keep you forever. Mm-hmm. I feel like we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't like touch on the creator a little bit. Mm-hmm. All right. And not from like a technical standpoint, but purely from like a career path standpoint, given the nature of this show. It's like, you are in a very enviable position to many DPs, and, in your own words, I don't want to say it, but like, what is the creator? Who's directing it? How did you get involved with it? Just give us like the quick 1-2 on like how you got involved in this project, because it's a huge, on any scale, project and movie that's coming out at the end of September. So I'm like so curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's still surreal, honestly. Like
that's a good place to be. That's a good beat. That's a good place to be. Yeah,
it's still surreal, and it felt surreal throughout the shoot, and it was definitely surreal like on the early phone calls. But I don't know, it's hard to describe that feeling, because the project kind of evolved a little bit. Like, it was originally pitched to me as something that was smaller in approach and in scope, and then it sort of ended up becoming a little bit more traditionally sized, and I kind of just had to like show up and do it. But it was great. I mean, it was a great adventure. So, I mean, the film's directed by Gareth Edwards, written and directed by Gareth Edwards, who, his first movie, well, he's known for Rogue One and for Godzilla, but his first movie, Monsters, is what really kind of put him on the map. Mm-hmm. And Monsters was a movie that he made with a cast and crew total of 10 people.
Oh, that's right. I remember hearing about this.
So he shot that movie. He was the DP and the editor and the visual effects artist, and he did all the CG on his computer, on his laptop. And the production designer, I think, too. So, like, they were a 10-person crew, including the cast. They had like a boom op and a local fixer and his producing partner, who also ended up producing The Creator, which was amazing. Jim Spencer is an amazing guy. And they basically drove around 5 countries in South America and Central America and just shot this film like completely guerrilla style. So he shot on the EX3, the Sony EX3, which is basically a handy cam with the latest adapter, and then put some stills lens on the front. I can't remember, like a Nikon or something. That's how he shot that movie. And it's all available light and like really just gritty, down and dirty, but it looks slick. Like, it looks big. It's not docu-style. And the stated goal with The Creator was that he wanted to make a movie in the same style as that film, or not the same style, but the same philosophy, like the same approach.
Yeah, the same feel. Yeah.
But on a much bigger canvas and a bigger scale with a bigger budget.
Yeah.
Because Monsters, I think, was made for $250K, and then I think had a final budget of $500 or something once you include like some post costs and stuff like that. But it's tiny compared to what it is. I mean, it's like a kind of pretty big scale sci-fi movie. It's a small scale story because it focuses on 2 people, but the scope of it that he achieved with the visual effects and all the location work was pretty astounding, and that's what got him Godzilla. So that was the goal with The Creator, was like, how can I kind of go back to those roots and put together a team of people that are on board with that approach and that mission statement and are just kind of down for the adventure. And that was it. Like, we just kind of dove in head first. And after a couple initial phone calls, I mean, Greig called me about it first, wanted to see if I was interested in coming on board, and was totally downplaying it at first. Like, I don't know if this will be interesting. Like, this is going to sound crazy. We're going to do co-DPs, and Gareth is operating the camera, and it's like this whole thing. And I was like, yeah, of course I want to do it. Like, what? Of course.
Yeah, what a silly question.
Yeah, I know, but no, he's also very humble and kind of downplaying it. But I chatted with, I had a nice Zoom interview with Greig and Gareth, and we were just talking about the project and Monsters and the goal and the overall philosophy and the holistic approach. And I was just down for it. I was like, yeah, let's go. Like, what an adventure and what an opportunity, obviously. And that was it. We shot for prep and shoot was 7 months total, I think.
Okay.
In Thailand on location. We did a little bit in London as well. And now the movie is about to come out end of September. So I think the sort of results are yet to be seen. Like, you know, I don't know how it's going to go. I have my hopes. You know, I hope people like it. I hope it gets good reviews. I hope people go see it. I think we made a good movie. Like, I'm really proud of it. I'm really happy with it. I think it's something special. It's an original sci-fi movie, which is extremely rare these days.
There's not a lot of those these days. Nope. For sure.
Not based on any existing IP. It's not an adaptation of anything. It's purely, it's playing on sci-fi tropes. Like it's all kind of ideas and concepts we've seen, but that's kind of all sci-fi. Like sci-fi is sort of a set of tropes and concepts that you just like explore from different angles, and like are androids, robots, artificial intelligence, like those are all just recurring concepts for like hundreds of years in science fiction. So it's a riff on those, but it's, I think, a very interesting angle with great characters and great images and visuals and setting and world building. And that's it. Like I have my hopes of what it can do and what doors it'll open and everything. But I've had to really, especially with this process, because so much of it is out of my hands. Like there's a whole studio and a marketing department and all, like it's just completely. It's not like indie films that I've done before where I can just text the director and be like, hey, we should do this, or we should put out that, I don't know, like on past films that I've had in festivals, for example, like I would usually text with the directors a little bit to be like, oh, here's the images we should select to put in the festival brochure and stuff like that. I have no say on anything on this movie. So, I just have to kind of go with the flow and, hope that Disney marketing knows what they're doing and set it up for success and just kind of be along for the ride, sort of like the shoot, which was like just along for the ride. And I feel that way about the release as well. And then we'll see where things go from here and what doors open. But yeah.
What a wild ride.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
So wild. But a couple of things.
Yes.
I mean, just from the outside looking in, not understanding any of like the politics or the intricacies or anything, I just find it cool that you're able to like hop on a Zoom with Greig Fraser and Gareth Edwards and like kind of shoot the shit and be like, yeah, this sounds interesting. And Gareth is going to be operating and Greig wants to bring you on to co-DP. And it's just like, it speaks to like a bigger thing in my head where there's I think a lot of people think at that level, things are very like dictatorial and it's like either, the director rules all or whatever, pick your trope or your, whatever. But I just find it really cool that even at that scale, there's still like this feel of like, yeah, let's just get in the weeds and like make something cool. And like, it feels like the way you talk about it, it feels like there's still that scrappy, like indie filmmaker spirit in there.
Yes.
Which I really, really like to hear.
And I mean, the thing is, it's rare at that level.
Totally.
Like it is rare. And I'm especially lucky to have like my first foray at that level be this, because, and I said that all throughout the shoot, I was like, I cannot believe this is my first movie at this level, because it's setting me up for disappointment on future stuff, because it'll be very hard for something to kind of hit that bar of that attitude and that mentality and that environment on set, which it was exactly what you said. I mean, it felt like we were shooting an indie film the whole time. Like that's what it felt like. That was the vibe.
Look, I get that, but it's like, what are you going to do? You're just going to stop making movies? Like, of course not.
No. Well,
so, right. So it's like, you've reached a pinnacle, but I think your attitude is right on, in my opinion, where you're just like, look, it was a huge learning experience. I got like a crazy education out of it.
Yeah.
I got to like have a crazy life experience doing this thing. And yeah, it's going to open some doors and you'll move on to something that you haven't even like fathomed yet.
Exactly.
Like you'll be able to do the next thing and just parlay this experience into the next thing, into the next thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is the kind of stuff that when I'm able to talk to people and they have experiences like this at a level that we all wish we were operating at, it makes me feel really good, because, it's like, oh yeah, okay, things are possible, things can happen, which is really very cool. And like I said, it must have been just such an awesome learning experience, and I'm very excited for you to see what happens.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited for people to see it. Like at this point,
totally. The trailers look awesome.
Yeah, they did a good job. I think the trailers are cool, and I'm really happy to be getting the feedback that we've been getting on them. It's very reassuring that at least people are interested, and they're buying what we're selling a little bit, because it's a bit of a tough sell. Like it's in this day and age, it's not easy, and it's not easy to get people invested and to get people
hard.
to even know about it, like to get this kind of thing on people's radar. It's an uphill battle in this day and age.
We live in a world of attention economy, and
Yes.
getting people's attention is so hard.
And it's
so
easy to get
hard.
people's attention with things they already know.
Totally.
That's why everything's a sequel or a franchise or a reboot, because it's a shortcut to attention.
Yeah.
And I get it, but that's why, I hope it'll find an audience. I think there's some out there. I think at least there's somebody, but will it be enough for to justify the studio's investment? Hopefully.
Yeah, man. Do you feel like you're trading like a set of life experiences you want to have for this career build, or do you feel like you're in like a holistic place where everything for now just seems to be fitting together, keeping in mind you can always change your mind later?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I'm trading anything. I feel like I'm living the lifestyle that I want. But
That's
I
awesome.
also recognize that it's probably not the lifestyle that other people want. 'Cause I don't have kids, and I don't really want kids, to be honest. At least not right now. So
and there you go.
That's just not like, it's such a cliche, but it's like my projects are my kids. Like the projects that I work on, each one of them is my baby.
Totally.
And and then I don't need a real baby to fill that. Like there's no gap. There's enough nurturing and love and stuff that's happening. I mean, I'm sure there's some biological process with an actual child that occurs that does not happen with an inanimate object that is a film, but I don't have that.
Yeah.
Yet.
Yeah. But no, that's really, that's where you're at. And like, if it changes, you cross that bridge when you get there.
Exactly.
But it's really nice to hear that, someone in an industry like ours that seems oftentimes harder than not has kind of like carved out this little piece of the puzzle for themselves that fits really well, which is really cool to hear. I've watched your career kind of move up and up and up, and as a creative person, no matter what your medium is, I think this plays into it a little bit. What are your thoughts on legacy? Like, what does that mean to you? And what do you want to leave behind? Because I think it's a little bit different for everybody.
Great question. Somebody who just has always loved movies, like that was my origin story as a person. Like I've loved movies before I can even remember, before I have memories. Like I was watching movies when I was 2-3 years old that I have like vague, foggy memories of, and there's so much personal like stuff mixed in with it. Like I used to go with my grandpa to the local theater in Haifa in Israel where I was born and later grew up. And that's just been like such a constant in my life, like that love. Mm-hmm. In my pursuit of this career, the guiding light has always been like, I just want to make movies that the future version of me will see and be inspired by. Mm-hmm. And I want to work on movies and TV shows, it's not just movies, that like contribute to the art form and contribute to the canon of like film history. And I don't just want to make stuff that's content, my least favorite word. Mm-hmm. Absolutely sends chills up my spine every time I see it. It's written down or spoken by, studio execs or whoever. I don't want to make something that's just like a job. I don't want to ever feel like this is just my clock in, clock out 9 to 5. Mm-hmm. I've always aspired to and want to work on things long term. Obviously, there's a journey to get to this point, but to be able to work on things that mean something to me as a film fan, like as a cinephile. Yeah. So that dictates like the stuff I say yes and no to, Sure. Because to me, this isn't just a job. Commercials, that kind of thing, that's a way to make a living. And I think as time has gone on, I've become less precious about commercials and just sort of been like, if it pays well, I'll shoot it. And I'm maybe not going to get too like emotionally invested in it as much as I used to. Mm-hmm. In terms of like trying to make something good and quality. Like sometimes you just got to shoot a commercial. You make it as good as you can, but you're not treating it like a piece of cinema. But
look, everybody's got to eat.
Totally.
Everybody's got to eat, but in terms of like where you're trying to get to or what you're trying to leave behind.
Yeah.
I totally get it. And it's never from a place of ego. It's not that you want at least for me, right?
It's not for me either. It's not. No.
Yeah. It's not that I want people to like say my name for the next 100 years. It's really just like, well, if I'm not leaving something, what's the point? What's the point of the whole ride?
Yeah. I mean, and to me, it really is just tied with cinema. Like, I love this art form. I love it more than anything.
It definitely shows.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe to a fault, but it was my first love, and it's my passion, and it's my obsession, and it's my life. And like, I want to make things that contribute to that legacy, like of cinema as an art form. That's what I want to do.
I think that is a very lovely place to leave this conversation. So before I let you go, where can people find you online? Where can they find out more about you? Just give us a quick rundown.
I'm very active on Instagram, Oren Soffer DP. I also have a website, orensoffer.com. I'm Vimeo and all these other places where you can just find the same stuff that you can find on my website and Instagram.
He's everywhere. He's all over the internet.
I'm everywhere. Letterboxd, LinkedIn. I don't use LinkedIn. I'm just kidding. I mean, I have an account, but I don't know. I don't know what's going on in there. It's probably just a bunch of, I don't know, like spam and MLMs and all sorts of stuff. I don't know. I haven't.
One day you'll go clean out the cobwebs. It's all good.
You know what? I'm just going to let the spiders live in their new home and not even going to bother.
Oh man. Well, Oren Soffer, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really, really appreciate it. I can't wait to go out and see The Creator.
In theaters, September 29.
Nice.
In IMAX and Dolby. Thanks. This was a great chat. It was really great to chat with you. And yeah, great conversation, great questions. And thanks, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, anytime. All right, everybody, there you go. That was my conversation with Oren. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It was really great to reconnect with him after a little bit. I'll be sure to put links to his website and anything else in the show notes for you to check out. Thank you, Oren, for being here. I know it's been a little crazy on your end, so I appreciate you taking the time. If you want to find out more about this show, head on over to nosetpath.com or find us on Instagram at nosetpathpodcast. You can look me up, your host, Drew English, at drewenglish.com or on Instagram at drewenglish with 2 H's at the end. As usual, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, like, subscribe, 5-star review, yada, yada, yada. Thanks so much for being here. Talk to you later.